Why was everyone watching her like that, like she didn't belong at her own range? The morning sun spilled over Fort Bragg, stretching across the red dirt and casting long shadows over the training field. The air was still, heavy with dust and quiet expectation. Somewhere downrange, a flag flickered faintly in the breeze, the only sign that the world hadn't stopped to hold its breath. And in the middle of that silence, Marine Sergeant Elena Rodriguez laid out the parts of her Barrett .50 like a surgeon before an operation. Each piece gleamed under the Carolina sun, cool metal waiting for purpose. Her fingers calloused, disciplined, steady, moved with a rhythm only years of repetition could create. The clack of a locking bolt, the whisper of oiled steel, every motion carried the patience of someone who didn't just use this weapon. She understood it. To most people, the Barrett was a monster, a 30-pound brute that punished every mistake and demanded respect. But to Elena, it was something different, something living. She didn't overpower it, she synchronized with it. They said she had a natural gift, that she could read wind like others read a map. But no one knew how many lonely hours it took to make natural look effortless. Her first rifle had been her grandfather's old Remington, the one that kicked like a mule. She'd learned to breathe between the gusts, to time her shots with the rhythm of cicadas buzzing in the Texas heat. Her grandfather would stand behind her, one weathered hand resting on her shoulder, whispering, "The gun don't matter, Nina. It's the stillness that kills." She hadn't realized, until much later, how right he'd been. That stillness had followed her here to Fort Bragg, to this strange morning where everything felt like a test she hadn't agreed to take. Because today, someone important was watching. Captain Marcus Steele, commander of the visiting Navy SEAL team, stood a few yards away, arms folded, expression unreadable behind his sunglasses. The man had a reputation. Decorated, respected, maybe even feared a little. His presence alone made people stand straighter. And yet when his eyes met hers, Elena didn't flinch. She'd heard the whispers before he arrived. "The SEALs are coming. Steele's here to evaluate. They're running joint ops, just a demo, no pressure." But Elena knew better. There's no such thing as no pressure when a legend is watching. Steele's team stood behind him, relaxed but alert, that quiet confidence that came from years of surviving situations most wouldn't return from. They looked at her rifle with curiosity, maybe amusement. The unspoken question was easy to read. What's a Marine doing showing off in front of SEALs? Elena ignored them. She adjusted the parallax on her scope, turned a small dial until the world came into perfect focus. The firing range stretched endlessly before her, targets scattered like tiny white dots across miles of open ground. The furthest standard target sat at 2,500 meters. Most considered that the edge of sanity for practical shooting. But Elena's gaze moved farther still, beyond the range, to the distant hillside that shimmered faintly under the morning sun. There, half hidden in dust and distance, was her real target, a scrap of metal the size of a dinner plate, placed there months ago and forgotten by everyone but her. 3,247 meters away. 2 miles. Impossible. She'd been preparing for this moment for weeks, tracking the weather, noting wind shifts, mapping every invisible current between her and that speck of metal. Every day she'd stood here alone, studying the air like scripture, waiting for the right day. And today, everything aligned. A light wind at her back, stable pressure, low humidity, the earth itself seemed to be giving her permission. She didn't say a word, she never did before a shot. Words got in the way of focus. Still, she could feel their eyes on her, the Marines she trained with, the SEALs who thought they'd seen everything, and Captain Steele, silent as a stone. Steele stepped closer, voice calm, professional. "Sergeant Rodriguez, what's your range today?" Elena didn't look up. "Depends on how far you want to believe, sir." A few of the SEALs chuckled quietly. Steele didn't. He watched her check the wind again. No fancy gadgets, just instinct and… Why did silence always feel heavier after a gunshot? Even hours later, Elena could still hear the echo of that thunderous blast, the Barrett's recoil rippling through her bones, the stunned breath of the seals hanging in the air, the wind carrying away the proof of what she had done. She hadn't meant to make history. She had just wanted the math to be right. By evening, Fort Bragg was alive with rumor. In the chow hall, whispers turned into debate. In the barracks, Marines replayed the shot over and over in their minds, trying to make sense of it. Some called it luck. Others called it genius. Elena didn't call it anything. She just kept cleaning the Barrett, her movements slow, precise, ritualistic. Each swipe of the cloth over the cold steel felt like confession. Because for all the applause, for all the awe, there was something she hadn't told anyone. Not Captain Steele, not her not even Morrison. Something that made the whole record feel less like victory and more like a warning. The range lights buzzed overhead. Outside, Fort Bragg was fading into twilight. Elena sat on the floor of the armory, surrounded by disassembled rifle parts, her sleeves rolled up, her hands streaked with oil. She stared at the barrel, 3 feet of precision-forged steel that had become both her voice and her silence. Her mind drifted back to Texas, to the sound of cicadas in summer, to her grandfather's steady hands guiding hers as she aimed at empty soda cans on a wooden fence. "Don't fight the rifle," he'd told her. "Feel it breathe. The shot's already decided before you pull the trigger." She laughed back then, thought it was just one of his poetic rancher sayings. Now she knew it wasn't poetry, it was prophecy. A knock at the armory door broke her trance. Captain Marcus Steele stepped inside, still in his field uniform, the faint smell of dust and cordite lingering around him. His face was unreadable, but his eyes carried that same curiosity that had burned in them on the range. "Sergeant Rodriguez," he said, "mind if I come in?" Elena straightened. "Of course, sir." He walked closer, his boots echoing against the concrete. For a long moment he didn't speak. He just watched her reassemble the rifle piece by piece, the same way she had earlier that morning, except now every movement carried the weight of what had changed. "I've seen a lot of shooters," he said finally, "none like you." She didn't look up. "You've seen better, sir." He gave a short laugh. "I've seen many, but no, none better, not at that distance." Elena tightened the barrel assembly. "Distance doesn't make you better, just quieter." That answer caught him off guard. Steele leaned against a workbench, crossing his arms. "You know, most people would be celebrating right now. You just rewrote every record in the book." "Records fade, sir. Wind doesn't." Her tone wasn't defiant, it was distant. And he heard something in it, something that made him realize this wasn't just about marksmanship. This woman had carried something long before that shot, and whatever it was, it weighed more than the Barrett itself. "You lost someone," he said quietly. Her hands paused mid-motion. The faint click of metal against metal stopped. She didn't answer, she didn't need to. The silence filled in the truth. Steele exhaled slowly. "We all have, Sergeant, but some of us keep firing anyway." She finally looked up at him. Her eyes were sharp but tired. "That's the thing, sir. Sometimes firing isn't the hard part. It's knowing when not to." He nodded once slowly, then turned toward the door. "Before leaving," he said, "you'll be getting visitors tomorrow. Word spread. They'll want to see you shoot again." Her jaw tightened. Verification. Officially, but unofficially, they want to see if lightning strikes twice. When he left, the armory felt emptier than before. The next morning came early, too early. The sky was still bleeding pale blue when Elena arrived at the range, her Barrett slung over her shoulder. This time, there were cameras, officers, analysts, scientists with clipboards and wide-eyed expressions like they were watching some kind of experiment instead of a soldier. Morrison was there too, the SEAL Master Chief who had doubted her the day before. He offered a nod, professional, not personal. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you ready to prove physics wrong again?" Elena gave a faint smile. "Physics doesn't care about pride, Chief. It just listens to precision." Colonel Hammond briefed the observers. Every detail of the verification would be documented: atmospheric readings, GPS data, ballistic computers. No room for debate. It wasn't just a test of skill anymore. It was a test of truth. Elena set up her position in the dust. Same place, same rifle, same routine. She could feel the stares on her back, the tension, the unspoken question burning in every mind present: was it a fluke? Her breathing slowed, the noise faded, even the hum of distant generators disappeared. And then came that stillness, the kind only snipers understood. The space between heartbeats. 4 seconds after the shot, a tiny puff of dust bloomed on the distant hillside. A perfect hit. The same distance, the same impossible range, the same flawless precision. The range erupted, not with cheers but with disbelief. The observers rushed to confirm data, shouting coordinates and readings. Morrison's voice cut through the commotion. "Impact confirmed. 3,247 meters on target." Elena lowered the rifle and quietly flipped on the safety. Her pulse hadn't even spiked. Colonel Hammond approached, binoculars still in hand, shaking her head in awe. "Sergeant, I've commanded shooters my entire career, but I've never seen anything like that." Elena didn't smile. "Ma'am, I just did the math." But Steele, standing off to the side, knew better. He saw it, the same haunted calm he'd seen in soldiers who had lost too much, given too much. This wasn't arrogance. It was control. The kind that only came from surviving something that had once spun out of control. When the crowd began dispersing, Steele waited until she was alone. "You've done more than set a record," he said softly. "You've changed doctrine." She looked at him, unreadable. "Doctrine doesn't bleed, sir." For a moment neither spoke. The wind shifted. The flag near the range whipped hard to the left, and Elena instinctively noted its movement, calculating its angle, an automatic reflex she couldn't turn off. Steele watched her. "I've got a feeling, Sergeant, this isn't the last time you'll be asked to do the impossible." She said nothing, just began packing up her rifle, one piece at a time. 2 weeks later, Elena found herself summoned to a briefing room filled with unfamiliar faces, uniforms with different patches, different insignias, but the same sharp eyes. Captain Steele stood at the front of the room beside a projection screen, showing aerial images of a mountainous region halfway across the world. He didn't waste time. "Task Force Orion," he began. "Joint Operations Unit, classified missions only. You've been requested by name." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Requested?" Steele nodded. "By me." He explained the mission profile: high-altitude operations, asymmetric threats, long-range surveillance and elimination. Elena listened in silence. Each word painted a picture she already understood too well: precision over chaos, patience over fury. When the briefing ended, she remained seated as others filed out. Steele lingered at the door. "You sure about this, Sergeant?" he asked. "This isn't a range, it's real war." Elena looked down at the Barrett case beside her chair. "It's always been real, sir, just quieter." That night in her quarters, she sat alone by the small window. The base was asleep, the world outside was still. On her desk lay a folded photo, her grandfather standing by that old Texas fence, the rifle slung over his shoulder. The same faint smile she wore now. She whispered into the quiet, "You were right, abuelo. The shots decided long before the trigger." Her hand brushed across the cold metal of the Barrett case. She'd shocked a SEAL commander, rewritten the limits of a weapon, and now She was being sent to the edge of war where the distance between life and death was measured not in meters, but in seconds. But still, the same question haunted her. If she could hit anything from miles away, why couldn't she forget what she'd already lost? The wind outside shifted. The night exhaled softly through the open vent. And in that quiet, a thought settled in her mind. That maybe her next target wouldn't just test her aim. It would test her soul. Because sometimes, precision isn't about distance. It's about how close you can come to peace. Why did the mountains feel like they were listening? The transport helicopter cut through thin Afghan air, its rotors hammering against the cold wind. Inside, the team sat in silence, their eyes hidden behind night vision goggles, their thoughts behind years of habit. Elena Rodriguez sat near the open door, her Barrett M82A1 strapped between her knees, wrapped in a desert tan case like a sacred relic. Every time she flew into combat, she felt that same quiet gravity, the kind that presses against your ribs and makes you remember what silence really costs. Captain Marcus Steele stood across from her, reviewing mission intel on a tablet glowing dim green. His expression was calm, almost detached, but she knew him well enough by now to sense when his mind was sharpening into command focus. They'd been training together for 2 months, joint operations, extreme-range simulations, mountainous terrain assessments. But tonight wasn't training. Tonight was war. Steele raised his voice over the rotor wash. Target zone, 10 mics. She nodded, pulling her scarf tighter around her neck. Her gloved hand brushed over the Barrett's steel barrel like one might touch an old friend before battle. Master Chief Jake Morrison, her spotter and now closest ally, leaned toward her, voice steady in the headset. "You good, ma'am?" Elena gave the smallest smile. "Ask me again in 10 minutes." The helicopter banked hard left, and the horizon tilted, a jagged sweep of dark ridgelines and pale starlight. Below, the Afghan mountains stretched endlessly, their shadows swallowing valleys like sleeping giants. This was their target area, Operation Hushed Rain. Intel had confirmed that an insurgent commander, known only by his code name Dervish, had fortified an observation post overlooking a critical supply route. His men used that vantage point to track coalition convoys and hit them with devastating accuracy. Every attempt to dislodge them had failed. The position was simply too far, too high, too exposed. Until now. They landed in silence, no lights, no chatter. The rotors faded into the night, leaving only the sound of gravel crunching beneath boots. The team moved like shadows through the thin mountain air, breath visible in the frigid dark. Their forward base was little more than a camouflaged tarp and a cold rock face. Morrison laid out the gear while Elena set up the Barrett on its bipod. The rifle looked oversized against the barren landscape, metal and intent forged into purpose. Steele knelt beside them, scanning the ridge through binoculars. "Observation post is here," he murmured, pointing to a faint glimmer of movement nearly 2 miles away across the valley. 3 hostiles confirmed. 1 high-value target. We can't risk artillery. We need precision." He turned to Elena. "That means you." Elena's heart didn't race. It simply sank, like a stone dropping into deep water. She'd done this before on ranges in simulations, but this wasn't Fort Bragg. This was flesh and breath. She adjusted her scope, her movements deliberate, soundless. The mountains were alive with shifting winds, and she could feel them, tiny invisible hands tugging at the air, whispering their secrets through the grass. Morrison began calling out environmental readings. Wind 7 knots west-northwest, temp -3 Celsius, humidity 35. Elena did the math automatically, scribbling variables into her range book. Her voice was calm. Target range 2854 meters, elevation correction 32.6 MOA. Steele listened quietly. To him, it sounded like sorcery. They waited for hours. The night crawled by, the stars wheeling overhead in perfect indifference. Every few minutes, Morrison whispered an update. Elena adjusted accordingly. She didn't blink much anymore. Didn't need to. The world beyond her scope was distant and irrelevant. At 3:17 hours, she finally saw movement, three silhouettes, framed by a dim firelight near a rocky outcrop. One of them was standing, speaking into a radio. His body language was calm, authoritative. "Dervish." Steele crouched beside her. "You've got one shot, Sergeant, make it count." She didn't respond. She was already breathing in rhythm. Her heart slowed, her muscles went still, her senses narrowing into one line of focus stretching across 2.8 kilometers of cold, thin air. She saw him clearly now, the commander's scarf fluttering in the wind, his shadow shifting on the rock. And then, for just a second, she hesitated. Her finger hovered above the trigger. In the glass of the scope, she saw not a target but a man, someone's son, maybe someone's father. She blinked once, the doubt flickered. Morrison noticed, "Ma'am." She didn't answer, she couldn't, because in that instant she remembered another face, a young Marine from her second deployment, a friend. She'd called in artillery on his coordinates after he was overrun. He begged her to, and she had. That voice still lived somewhere in her chest, buried under medals and math. "Elena," Steele said softly, voice cutting through her thoughts. "Focus." She exhaled, slow, steady. And squeezed. The Barrett roared, a thunderclap tearing through the night, echoing off the mountain walls. 4 seconds later, the fire near Dervish's position flared, then vanished. The man dropped without sound. The others scattered, confused, shouting into the dark, unaware that death had come from beyond imagining. Morrison's voice came through the comms, low and certain. "Target neutralized, clean hit." Steele's reply was simple, "Confirmed." Elena stayed still, her cheek pressed against the stock, watching through the scope as the dust settled. Her breath trembled once. Then she lowered the rifle. They exfiltrated before dawn, moving through terrain that seemed almost sacred in its silence. The valley below still slept beneath a blanket of mist. When the helicopter lifted them out, Elena stared down at the mountains fatting beneath her boots. For a brief moment, she felt nothing. And that terrified her more than anything else. Morrison noticed her distant stare. "You did good, ma'am, saved lives today." She nodded once but didn't speak. Inside, the quiet grew louder. Because something about the way Dervish fell, the way his body crumpled in absolute silence, reminded her how fragile the boundary was between precision and humanity. 2 days later, they were back at base. The mission had been declared a success. Commendations were pending. Elena sat on the barracks steps in the fading light, cleaning her rifle again, her fingers moving by habit. Steele approached, carrying 2 cups of black coffee. He handed her one. "You don't have to keep doing that every time." She shrugged. "It keeps me calm." "Does it?" She looked at him. "Sometimes." They sat in silence for a long while, the distant hum of generators the only sound. Steele finally said, "You hesitated out there." Her hand stilled. He continued, his tone neither judgmental nor accusing, just observant. "You hesitated and then you took the shot anyway. Why?" Elena looked toward the horizon. The sky was bruised purple and gold. "Because," she said quietly, "I saw his face." Steele frowned slightly, and I didn't want to forget it." He studied her profile, strong, controlled, but with cracks running just beneath the surface. "That's not weakness, Sergeant." She smiled faintly. "No, but it's not strength either." Steele took a slow sip of his coffee. "You ever wonder why we keep people like you in the field?" She glanced at him, unsure where he was going. He said, "Because you still think about faces." The words lingered, heavier than the rifle between them. Weeks passed. Missions blurred together: covert overwatch, convoy protection, counterinsurgency reconnaissance. Elena's legend began to spread quietly through the task force. Soldiers started calling her the Long Eye. The name made her uneasy. She'd become the weapon commanders called when they needed precision, beyond reason. But with every mission, the silence after the shot grew longer, heavier. She found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling of the makeshift tent, counting seconds between wind gusts, remembering every target who never even saw her coming. Morrison noticed her drifting further inward. "You're starting to live in the scope," he said one night. She looked at him, tired. "Maybe it's quieter there." "Quiet ain't peace, Elena." He used her first name only when he was worried. Their next mission came without warning. A convoy had been ambushed in the northern corridor. A survivor had radioed in, 2 soldiers pinned down, 1 critically wounded. The enemy controlled the high ground. They needed overwatch, and fast. Within an hour, Elena and Morrison were in the air again, Steele coordinating from command. The helicopter roared over frozen peaks, the world below painted in fire and smoke. As they descended toward an overwatch ridge, Morrison scanned the valley with binoculars. Hostiles on that ridge, 2,200 meters, 2 friendlies trapped behind the wreck. Elena unpacked the Barrett before he finished. Wind direction: variable 9 o'clock, 6 knots, temp -5. Elevation: -40 meters. She was already sighting in. Through her scope, she saw them clearly. The 2 soldiers crouched behind burning debris, smoke curling around them like black lace. And beyond them, the ridge, silhouettes of armed men, confident, careless, believing distance would save them. She didn't speak, she didn't think. She fired. And again. And again. Each shot cracked the sky. Each echo rolled through the valley like thunder. Each hit found its mark. The friendlies scrambled free, waving toward the ridge in disbelief before disappearing behind the rocks. Morrison let out a slow breath. "That's 3 for 3. Elena blinked once, lowered her rifle. "Let's hope that's enough." Steele's voice came through the radio moments later. "Extraction confirmed. Outstanding work." But Elena didn't feel outstanding. She felt hollow. Because this time she hadn't hesitated, not even for a heartbeat. That night, as the base settled into uneasy sleep, Elena sat alone again, staring at her rifle under the lantern's dim glow. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from realization. She was getting too good at not feeling. Outside, the wind swept through the empty tents, whispering over the ridges like ghosts counting names. And she wondered how many more she would have to remember before she forgot herself completely. She looked at the Barrett, resting silent and perfect, and said under her breath, "Precision is easy, mercy's the hard part." How does a legend begin? Usually with a lie, or worse, a truth told too many times. By the time the unit rotated back to base, Elena's name had already traveled farther than her bullet ever had. Reports described her shot at Fort Bragg as impossible, her field missions as surgical. Somewhere in a Pentagon office, her 3,247-meter kill had become a line in a PowerPoint slide, a statistic wrapped in a headline. Confirmed record holder, unmatched precision, asset for long-range operations. They made her sound like a weapon system, not a woman. She noticed the shift almost immediately. Officers she'd never met stopped her in corridors. Cameras followed her training sessions. A tech team from DARPA requested her input for a new scope calibration algorithm. Every smile felt rehearsed, every handshake too firm. They all wanted a piece of what she'd done, but none wanted to understand why it had cost her so much to do it. Morrison saw it first. "You know you've gone viral in the brass world, right? he said one morning over instant coffee. She snorted softly. I didn't do it for them. Doesn't matter. They'll still build a doctrine around you. Elena gave a tired smile. Doctrine doesn't bleed. He nodded. No, but soldiers do. 2 weeks later, the orders came. A joint operation, black classification. High-value target. Insurgent logistics commander hiding in a civilian compound near the coast border. Intel confirmed he rarely left, surrounded by family, staff, and local guards. Satellite imagery showed a single window on the top floor, the only clear line of sight. Elena studied the photos silently, tracing the angles, calculating distances before anyone spoke. Captain Steele's voice broke the silence. Mission code name, Silent Mercy. You and Morrison will deploy 48 hours from now. Engage at 2,000 meters. Minimize collateral. He paused. That means 0 civilian casualties. Elena nodded, understood. But later, when she was alone, staring at the grainy satellite image of that house, she whispered the question that had started to haunt her before every mission. What if the math is perfect, but the morality is? They flew in under darkness again. The cold bit sharper at this altitude, the air thinner. The Overwatch post was a crumbling ledge overlooking a valley dotted with scattered homes. In the moonlight, the target building stood like a pale scar among the shadows. Morrison unpacked the spotting scope, his movements mechanical. 2 guards outside, 4 on the roof, nothing irregular. Elena lay prone, aligning the Barrett on its bipod, sighting through the scope. Her field of view filled with soft lamplight behind that single window. Inside, silhouettes moved, 1 taller man, 2 smaller forms. Children, maybe. Her stomach tightened. Target confirmed, Morrison asked. She hesitated. Yeah, he's there, but there are kids in the room. Orders were clear, he said, quieter now. No civilians in play at time of engagement. Maybe they'll move. They didn't. Hours passed, the mountain winds shifted, the night grew thinner. The children stayed. At 300, Steele's voice came through the comms. Rodriguez, confirm visual. You are cleared to engage on confirmation of target alone. Elena froze. The words echoed inside her head, target alone. But the children were still there, 1 asleep, 1 playing with something shiny that caught the light. She could see their small reflections glinting in the glass. Negative, she replied softly. Children still present, no clear window. Steele's tone sharpened. Sergeant, this is a time-sensitive mission. We lose him tonight, we lose him for months. Confirm target status. Elena's breath trembled. Target in sight, she said, but non-combatants remain. Understood, Steele said after a pause. Hold until cleared. The silence that followed was worse than gunfire. Dawn crawled over the valley in slow, merciless gold. At 5:42, a radio message intercepted on command frequencies confirmed movement. The target was preparing to leave the compound. If he reached the convoy trail, he'd vanish into the mountains. Steele came back on comms, voice clipped. Rodriguez, engage immediately. Elena exhaled. Her finger found the trigger. Through the glass, she saw the man stand, adjust his jacket, glance back toward the children. She couldn't breathe. Ma'am, Morrison whispered, you have to take the shot. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She had never missed a confirmed target, never. But now, every instinct screamed against it. She saw her grandfather's hands guiding hers on that Texas ranch, his voice soft. The shot's already decided before you pull the trigger. But this one was, not yet. Elena, Morrison said, firmer this time. She blinked away tears she hadn't felt forming. And then she made her decision. She shifted the crosshairs 2 inches right, a deliberate miss. The bullet struck the wall beside the target, sending a shower of dust and panic through the room. The man ducked, shouting orders, dragging the children away from the window. Within seconds, the lights went out. Morrison stared at her. What the hell was that? She said nothing, just ejected the spent casing. Steele's voice came through the comm, razor-sharp. "Rodriguez, report status." "Target moved, sir," she said evenly. "Missed." "Negative, sir. Wind shift, I'll reacquire." But there was no reacquire. The house went dark, then silent. They exfiltrated under sunrise. The air was heavy with the metallic taste of unspoken words. Back at the forward base, Steele called her into the command tent. His tone was quiet, controlled, more dangerous than shouting. "You deliberately missed." Elena met his gaze without flinching. There were children in the room. "I gave you an order. And I followed my conscience." For a moment, neither moved. The canvas walls of the tent creaked in the wind, the world outside oblivious to the collision happening within. Steele stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think morality wins wars, Sergeant?" She answered softly, "No, sir, but maybe it stops them from killing what's left of us." He studied her long, hard, and then exhaled. "Officially," he said, "I'll file this as environmental interference. Unofficially." He paused. "Don't ever lie to me again." She nodded once, understood. But the look in his eyes wasn't anger. It was something closer to envy. Because somewhere deep down, he remembered what it felt like to hesitate too, before he stopped letting himself. That night the camp was alive with distant thunder, mortars striking somewhere beyond the ridges. Elena sat outside her tent, the Barrett beside her, her range book open to a blank page. For the first time in years, she didn't record the shot. There was nothing to calculate, no data worth preserving. Morrison joined her quietly, sitting on a crate. "You saved those kids," he said after a long silence. "Maybe," she murmured, "but I also let a killer go." He shrugged. "That's command's job to live with, not yours." She gave a faint smile. "You don't really believe that." He chuckled dryly. "No, but I'll say it until I do." The wind rose again, carrying fine dust across the camp. The sound reminded her of whispering, the same faint voices that followed her after every mission. Only this time, one voice sounded almost forgiving. A week later, Steele received new orders. The task force was to redeploy north for a classified operation involving Allied civilians and reconstruction teams under threat. Elena wasn't listed on the manifest. When she read the orders, she understood. This was his way of protecting her from disciplinary review. But part of her felt something else. Exile. She spent those days isolated in a hangar, recalibrating weapons for the next rotation. Her reputation as the Long Eye had started to fracture. Rumors spread quietly that she'd flinched, that she'd gone soft, that her nerves were slipping. Nobody said it to her face, but she could see it in their eyes. Morrison tried to brush it off. "Let them talk. You did what most of them couldn't." She looked up from her tools. "Maybe they're right." "About what?" "That I'm slipping." He shook his head. "You're not slipping, Elena, you're remembering." The night before redeployment, Steele found her again, alone on the airstrip, staring at the distant lights of the flight line. "Colonel Hammond's pulling strings to get you reassigned to marksmanship instruction," he said. "Stateside, training new recruits." She didn't answer right away. Finally she said, "That's where old rifles go, isn't it?" He frowned. "That's where they rest." She glanced at him. "And you'll keep fighting." Steele's jaw tightened. "Someone has to." She nodded slowly. "Then you'll understand why I can't rest yet." The wind caught her hair, tossing it across her face. For a moment she looked less like a soldier and more like something else, something raw, untamed, unfinished. "Permission to speak freely, sir." "Always." "You think you're keeping me safe by sending me home," she said quietly. "But this," She gestured toward the endless dark horizon. This is where my ghosts live, and I don't know how to leave them behind unless I face them again. Steele's eyes softened, the command mask cracking just slightly. Then face them, he said, but don't let them choose your targets. The next morning she boarded the transport anyway. Orders were orders. The engines roared to life, drowning out thought. As the base shrank below, she looked out at the horizon and for the first time didn't see distances. She saw faces. The ones she'd saved. The ones she hadn't. And somewhere in between, the faint reflection of herself. Not the legend, not the sniper, but the girl from Texas who just wanted to get the math right. Maybe legends didn't start with lies. Maybe they started when people stopped telling the truth. She closed her eyes, whispered to the hum of the engines. Sometimes, restraint is the hardest trigger to pull. And for the first time in months, the silence that followed didn't feel heavy. It felt human. Why was it so quiet? That was the first thing Elena noticed about life stateside. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. The range at Camp Pendleton stretched wide beneath the California sun, dry grass swaying in a lazy wind. New recruits lined up in the sand, their rifles awkward in untested hands. Elena stood behind them, sunglasses hiding the exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. "Slow your breathing," she said evenly. "Don't fight the trigger, let it surprise you." Most nodded, pretending to understand. Only a few listened. When the shots rang out, they came uneven, scattered reports echoing across the field, like an orchestra trying to find its rhythm. She moved down the line, correcting stances, adjusting grips. Each correction felt mechanical, the same lesson, the same mistake, the same polite thanks. But inside she was somewhere else. Back in the mountains, back in that silence between heartbeat and thunder. Later that day, she stood alone at the far end of the range. Her Barrett lay on the bench beside her, the same rifle from Fort Bragg, its surface scarred, worn smooth from years of service. Technically, she wasn't supposed to bring it here. It wasn't standard training equipment. But she couldn't let it go. It was the only thing that still felt real. She chambered around and sighted downrange. The target shimmered in the afternoon heat, 1,000 meters, child's play compared to the mountains. She steadied her breath. The shot broke. A clean hit, center mass. No one clapped this time. No one gasped. It was just her, the rifle, and the faint smell of cordite fatting into the wind. For a long moment she stayed still, cheek resting against the stock. And then she whispered, barely audible. "I didn't come home, I just changed coordinates." Evenings were worse. The barracks were quiet after lights out, but her mind was. She'd close her eyes and see faces, sometimes the targets, sometimes the children. Sometimes her grandfather, silent by that old fence in Texas, watching her with that same knowing look. He'd told her once, the hardest part of aim is deciding what not to hit. Back then she thought he meant patience. Now she understood he meant mercy. Her phone buzzed one night, unknown number, she ignored it. It rang again, same number. She sighed and answered, "Rodriguez." A familiar voice came through, firm, composed, with that edge of command she'd never forgotten. "Sergeant, it's Captain Steele." Her heartbeat quickened. "Sir." "I know you're off the line," he said, "but we need to talk." She leaned against the wall, pulse suddenly alive. "This about the miss?" "No," he said, "this is about something else, something bigger." 2 days later, she was sitting across from him in a briefing room at Quantico. The walls were white, the coffee was bad, the tension was familiar. Steele looked older, leaner, the kind of tired that command builds behind the eyes. He slid a file across the table. "Operation Glass Dagger, Joint Task Force, you've been requested." Elena didn't open the file. "I'm not in rotation, sir." "I know," he said, "but this isn't rotation, this is recall." She stared at him. Why me? Steele's gaze held steady. Because they need someone who can do the impossible, and because I trust you. Her laugh was soft, bitter. You trust the Marine who disobeyed an order. I trust the one who remembered what she was shooting for. He leaned back, his voice dropping lower. Intel recovered last week confirms a rogue cell has taken control of an old surveillance station in northern Kurdistan. They're coordinating long-range drone strikes against Allied convoys. We can't hit them directly, civilian shields too dense. We need an overwatch position miles out. You're the only one who's ever proven you can make that shot. Elena opened the file. Satellite photos, terrain maps, a narrow ridge overlooking a small town. Her throat tightened. There are civilians down there. Steele nodded. That's why you're here. You don't miss, and you don't make mistakes. For a long time, she didn't answer. Then she said, I thought you were done sending me into mountains. He gave a small, sad smile. So did I. The deployment came fast, too fast. She packed in silence, her motions automatic, range book, ballistic calculator, weather reader, scope. When she reached the Barrett, she paused. Her reflection in the steel caught her off guard. She didn't look like the girl from Fort Bragg anymore. She looked like someone forged out of recoil and regret. Before boarding the flight, she stopped by Morrison's quarters. He was off duty, half asleep in his chair, boots on the desk. When he saw her, his eyes widened. Don't tell me. She nodded. Steele called me back. He sighed, rubbing his face. You knew peace wasn't gonna fit you for long. She smiled faintly. It's not peace, it's penance. Same difference, he muttered. He stood, grabbed his jacket. You're not going alone. Elena frowned. Morrison. Save it, I'm your spotter. You need data. I need a reason. She shook her head, but the argument was already lost. When they landed in Kurdistan, the air was colder than expected, high-altitude winds sweeping across endless stone valleys. Steele briefed them quickly. Target is a command van positioned within civilian perimeter. The drone network uplink is hidden in the eastern ridge. You take out the operator, the link dies. One shot, clean. Elena nodded, studying the topography. The distance was brutal, 2,950 meters. She could do it. But something in the image gnawed at her. The uplink van sat close to a marketplace, just beyond a cluster of makeshift homes. Any margin of error meant death for someone who didn't deserve it. Sir, she said slowly, this shot cuts through a civilian line. Steele's voice was calm. That's why it's yours. They moved out under cover of darkness. The Overwatch post sat halfway up a barren slope, wind screaming through broken rock. Morrison set up the spotting gear while Elena unfolded the bipod, her gloves stiff from cold. Distance, she asked. 2957 meters. You're pushing the limit. Wouldn't be the first time. She lay flat, sighting through the scope. The van was barely visible, a pale shape under streetlights. Figures moved inside, shadows against glass. Her heartbeat slowed, her breath evened. The wind tugged at her scarf like a whisper from another life. 2 meters left drift, Morrison said softly. Copy. Her finger found the trigger. She could feel the moment building, that delicate point between calculation and faith. Then movement. A child ran across the street, chasing something metallic that clattered in the wind. Elena froze. Morrison saw it too. Hold. The boy stumbled, stopped to pick up a piece of foil, then darted back toward the houses. For a second, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Window clear, Morrison whispered. Elena didn't respond. Window clear, he repeated firmer. Still, she didn't move. In her scope, she saw the operator lean forward, adjusting the console. One squeeze, that was all it would take. And then the memory hit her, the same window, the same children, the same choice. Only this time, The consequences were bigger than one house. "Elena," Morrison said quietly, "you can't miss this one." She exhaled. "I'm not missing." The Barrett thundered. The echo rolled across the mountains like God's own heartbeat. Through the scope, the van erupted in sparks, the operator collapsing instantly. The drone uplink went dark. Mission complete. Civilians untouched. But Elena didn't feel triumph, only silence. They hiked down in dawn light, boots crunching against frost. Steele met them halfway, radio in hand. "Confirmed," he said. "Command van neutralized, no collateral, excellent work." Elena nodded, but her face was unreadable. Morrison glanced at her, uneasy. "You okay?" She nodded again, "Just tired." Steele watched her for a moment. "You didn't hesitate this time." She met his gaze. "No, sir." He studied her expression. "That a good thing?" She looked away. "I don't know anymore." Back at base, she sat alone in the dim light of the operations tent. The Barrett lay disassembled on the table before her. Her range book sat open to the last page, coordinates, wind readings, time of impact. She stared at the blank space beneath them. Then, for the first time, she didn't write the distance. Instead, she wrote one word: enough. Morrison found her there hours later, the morning sun breaking through canvas seams. He didn't say anything, just pulled up a chair beside her. Finally, she whispered, "I think I'm done, Jake." He nodded slowly. "Then be done. No shame in walking away before the recoil breaks you." She smiled faintly. "Recoil's just physics, guilt's the real kickback." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You always did talk like a philosopher with a scope." Later that day, Steele came by. He didn't bring orders, no files, no coffee. Just stood in the doorway, looking at her, at the woman who had changed what people believed was possible with a rifle. "Rodriguez," he said finally, "you've done enough for 10 lifetimes." She looked up. "You don't believe that?" He hesitated, then smiled sadly. "Maybe I just wish I did." He turned to leave, but she stopped him. "Sir," she said softly, "do you ever think about the ones we didn't take?" He paused at the door. "Every night." She nodded. "Then maybe that's what keeps us human." He didn't answer, just gave a small, silent salute before walking away. That night she stood outside her quarters, the wind cool against her face. Somewhere far away, another war rumbled. Another sniper steadied their aim. She closed her eyes and thought of home, of the old Texas fence, of laughter, of sunlight without the smell of gunpowder. Her grandfather's voice came back, faint and steady. "The shot's already decided before you pull the trigger." Maybe he'd been right all along. Maybe what she'd been aiming for wasn't the target at all. Maybe it was peace. The stars above shimmered, distant and steady. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel the urge to measure the distance between them. Can silence follow you across continents? Elena learned that it could. It found her everywhere, in the wind between Texas oaks, in the clatter of the train that carried her back to civilian life, in the quiet stare of her own reflection when she looked too long in the mirror. She'd been home for 5 months. 5 long, still restless months. Her official discharge papers called it voluntary separation for medical reasons. Steele had made sure the language stayed kind, but everyone knew what it meant. The sniper who hit targets beyond human reach had finally put down her rifle. Her days were routine. She taught at a small shooting range outside San Antonio, mostly weekend hobbyists and veterans trying to stay sharp. She spoke softly, smiled politely, and avoided questions about that shot. When people recognized her, and they always did, she pretended not to notice the awe in their eyes. They saw the legend. She saw the distance it had cost her. One morning, as she cleaned the old Barrett, her Barrett, for the 1000th time, the wind carried a sound she hadn't heard in months. the distinct pop-pop-pop of semi-auto fire in the hills beyond the range. It wasn't unusual, but something about it made her heart skip. 3 bursts, precise spacing, military rhythm. She stood, scanning the ridgeline. And that's when she saw the SUV, black, unmarked, climbing the dirt road toward the range. A man stepped out, tall, wearing civilian clothes that didn't hide the military stance. He removed his sunglasses. "Captain Steele," she said quietly. "Not captain anymore," he replied, offering a half-smile. "They retired me. You're not the only one they wanted to make disappear gracefully." He looked older, the kind of older that comes from command decisions you never stop replaying. "Why are you here?" she asked. Steele exhaled slowly. "Because someone's using your name." Inside her small office, the air felt too still. The only sound was the soft click of the ceiling fan. Steele placed a folder on the table, black, unmarked, thick with reports. Elena hesitated before opening it. Inside were satellite images, ballistic diagrams, and a series of photos she wished she hadn't seen. "Where were these taken?" she asked. "Northern Syria," Steele said, 3 weeks ago." Her eyes moved across the pages. Each image showed precise, surgical strikes. Distances measured in kilometers, impacts perfect. "Too perfect." "These look like drone hits," she said. "They're not, they're ballistic." He paused. "They're your ballistic signature." Her chest tightened. "That's not possible." He nodded grimly. "That's what I said." He slid another photo across the table, a close-up of a recovered round. Stamped near the casing groove was something faint but unmistakable, the hand-etched mark she used for calibration. Her personal mark, the same one she'd used on her last deployment. "They're calling the shooter the Ghost of Coast," Steele said. "Every strike matches your old profile, range, precision, atmospheric compensation. Someone's replicating your methods." Elena leaned back, staring at the folder like it might bite. "How the hell did they get my data?" "That's what I need you to help figure out," Steele said, "and maybe stop it before this ghost starts a war." They flew out under false credentials 2 days later. Elena hadn't touched the Barrett in months, but when Steele handed her the case before boarding, her fingers tightened around it like muscle memory had never left. As the aircraft roared toward the Middle East, she sat in silence, watching the earth fall away below them, vast deserts, veins of dry riverbeds. It all looked the same. Different country, same ghosts. Steele leaned toward her. "You sure you're up for this?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Does anyone ever ask that before sending you back into hell?" He smiled faintly. "Not usually." Their base of operations was a worn-out safehouse in Erbil, cracked walls, flickering lights, the smell of diesel and coffee. Steele briefed her quickly. "Our intel says the shooter is operating independently, no known affiliation. But whoever it is, they've hit 6 targets so far, every shot perfect. No witnesses, no errors. The last one hit a convoy carrying aid workers." Elena felt her stomach knot. "Collateral. 3 dead, all civilians." She closed her eyes. "Then this isn't imitation, it's desecration." That night she couldn't sleep. The city hummed softly outside, distant motorcycles, barking dogs, the uneven pulse of life after war. She sat by the window, polishing the Barrett's scope, though it didn't need it. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, haunted, older than her years. Steele's voice came from the dark behind her. "You still talk to yourself when you clean that thing." She smiled faintly. "Keeps me honest." He leaned against the wall. "You think whoever this is learned from your training manuals?" She shook her head. "No, they learned from me." He frowned, meaning. She met his eyes. "Meaning I trained a lot of people, sir, and not all of them came home." 2 days later, their intel lead arrived, a young Kurdish liaison named Layla, sharp-eyed, steady-voiced. She placed a tablet on the table showing heat maps and wind charts. The shooter operates from this region, she explained, pointing to a plateau overlooking a series of villages. Pattern of attacks suggests methodical testing. Distances range between 2 and 3 kilometers. Elena studied the data. He's calibrating, she murmured, just like I used to. Steele raised an eyebrow. For what? She looked up slowly. For a shot that matters. Layla hesitated. There's more. Locals say he leaves a mark at every site, initials carved into stone. What initials? Steele asked. Layla's eyes flicked toward Elena. ER. The room went still. That's not possible, Steele said quietly. Elena said nothing. Her pulse thundered in her ears. They set up an overwatch position, overlooking the plateau. The night air was cold, the stars razor-sharp. Elena lay prone beside her rifle, scanning the valley through her scope. Hours passed, nothing moved. Then a flash. Not light but reflection, scope glare. Contact, she whispered. Steele crouched beside her. Where? 2 ridges north, he's watching us. The wind shifted, brushing dust over her face. She refocused, and what she saw made her blood freeze. The figure across the valley wasn't hiding. He was prone, calm, focused. And his rifle was a Barrett. Her Barrett. She could tell by the custom rail engraving. The same mark she'd etched years ago, ER at the base of the receiver. Her voice trembled for the first time in years. That's my rifle. Steele's tone sharpened. Say again. That's my weapon, the one I turned in after discharge. Someone took it. The realization hit like recoil. Whoever this was, they weren't just imitating her. They were her reflection. The sniper fired. The sound rolled across the valley, deep and thunderous. A puff of dust erupted near their position. A warning shot, deliberate, controlled. Elena's breath caught. He's not trying to kill us. Steele gritted his teeth. Then what the hell is he doing? She exhaled. He's challenging me. They withdrew under darkness, relocating before dawn. Steele paced the safe house, restless. We can't risk another engagement until we know who we're dealing with. Elena sat in silence, her thoughts spiraling. Finally, she said softly, I think I already know. Steele stopped packing. Who? A recruit, she whispered, Private Adrian Vega. I trained him 3 years ago in marksmanship instruction. He had a gift, same instincts I had, but he was impatient, obsessed with range. He wanted to push further than anyone. When the program cut funding, he vanished. We assumed he transferred. Maybe he didn't. Steele's jaw clenched. You think he stole your rifle? She nodded, or someone gave it to him. The implication hung heavy between them. That night, she lay awake, listening to the wind hum against the broken shutters. For the first time in her life, she was on the other side of the scope, hunted not by an enemy, but by a version of herself she had helped create. Steele found her before dawn, his voice quiet but firm. If this Vega's gone rogue, Command wants him neutralized. They'll send a team. Elena shook her head. No, they'll never get close enough. You think you can? She looked at him, eyes steady. He learned to shoot like me, but he didn't learn when not to. Steele hesitated. This isn't your responsibility. She stood, slinging the Barrett over her shoulder. Yes, sir, it is. By sunrise, she was already on the ridge, glassing the horizon through the scope. The air was thin, the light pale and cold. And somewhere out there, another scope was looking back at her. For a long moment, neither moved. 2 ghosts staring across a canyon, both shaped by the same aim, the same precision, the same curse. She whispered under her breath. You wanted to be me, Adrian. Now let's see if you learned what that costs. The wind carried her words away, east, into the rising light. The duel hadn't begun yet. But both of them knew it was coming. And this time, the distance wouldn't matter. This time, the target was something deeper. Why do the ghosts we make always know where to find us? The sun hadn't yet burned the mist off the Kurdish mountains when Elena took her position on the ridge. She moved like memory, slow, deliberate, invisible. Every crunch of rock beneath her boots felt like a countdown. Steele's voice came softly through her comms. "Rodriguez, you don't have to do this." She adjusted her scope, her tone quiet. "Yes, I do. This isn't an engagement, it's personal. That's exactly why I can't let anyone else pull the trigger." The line went silent. He knew there was no changing her mind. Elena settled into the prone position, her Barrett steady on its bipod, sight fixed across the canyon. 2 miles of air and silence separated her from Adrian Vega, the soldier she had trained, the prodigy she'd once called her successor. Now he was her reflection and her reckoning. The wind at this altitude was unpredictable, slicing through the valley in invisible waves. She watched the mirage shimmer over the rocks, reading it the way other people read scripture. Her voice was barely audible. Wind, 7 east-northeast, variable, temp, 4 degrees Celsius, visibility good. Steele responded from command, "Do you have eyes on him?" She hesitated. "Not yet, but he has eyes on me." She could feel it, the prickling along her neck, the instinct only snipers understand. The certainty that someone else is looking through glass at the same horizon. Her heartbeat slowed. She scanned ridge after ridge until... There! A flicker, a glint of light off metal, barely perceptible through the haze. "Contact," she whispered. The scope revealed him, prone behind a rock, wind scarf fluttering, rifle steady. Her rifle! The realization hit harder than recoil. She could see the serial engraving she'd etched by hand years ago. ER. He hadn't erased it. He'd kept it, as if to remind her that every bullet he fired still carried her name. "Elena," Steele said quietly, "we can call in a team, pin him down." "No," she replied. "He'll vanish before they even crest the ridge." "What's your play?" She exhaled. "I talk first." She keyed the long-range frequency, used during training exercises. "Adrian," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel, "you're in my scope." There was a pause, then static. Then a voice came back, young, clear, steady. "I know." The sound of it hit her harder than she expected. That voice used to call her ma'am, used to sound eager, respectful. Now it sounded hollow. "You trained me too well," he said over the radio. "You shouldn't have come." "I came because you're killing civilians," she said. "Collateral," he replied, "just like you taught us. Targets serve the mission serves the greater good." Her jaw clenched. "That's not what I taught you." "Then maybe I learned the wrong lesson." His tone didn't carry anger. It carried belief, cold, absolute belief. She steadied her breathing. "Adrian, listen to me. Whatever you think you're doing, it's gone too far." "Too far," he echoed. "You made me measure distance for a living, ma'am. I only went where the numbers led." The words cut deep. Elena could see him shifting slightly behind his rifle, adjusting for the wind, exactly the way she'd shown him years ago. Every movement, every angle hers. She spoke softer now. "Why use my mark? Why carve my initials?" "So the world remembers who made this possible," he said. Her chest tightened. "You think this is legacy?" He paused. "It's correction." She frowned. "Correction." "You pulled the trigger that changed doctrine," he said. "Now they make drones out of it, teach it to algorithms. You gave them distance. I'm giving it back." He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a zealot of mathematics and vengeance, a believer in a twisted cause born from her own perfectionism. "Adrian," she said, voice trembling now, "you can still stop this." "You can't stop physics," he replied. "Once the bullet leaves the barrel, it's already decided." Her eyes filled, unbidden. He turned her grandfather's words, her truth, into justification. "Then maybe I'll stop the shooter," she whispered. The wind shifted again. She knew what that meant. He was readying his shot. "Elena," Steele's voice warned through the calm, "if he fires you—" "I know." She made her final adjustments. The wind flags across the canyon fluttered unpredictably. A clean shot was possible, barely. But this wasn't a firing range. This was a mirror held up by God. Through her scope, she saw him take a breath. And in that moment, she whispered the last thing she'd ever wanted to say. "I'm sorry, Adrian." 2 thunderclaps split the morning air. 2 bullets left their barrels, one from her rifle, one from his. Both perfect. The seconds that followed stretched into eternity. Her bullet struck first. His rifle jerked upward, his body collapsing against the rocks. Her scope went still. And then she felt it, the searing burn along her left shoulder. His shot had grazed her. Half an inch difference and both would have died. "Elena," Steele's voice cracked through the calm. "Status." She didn't answer. She just watched through the scope. Adrian was still alive, barely. He was moving, dragging himself upright, blood staining the rock beneath him. She stood, left the rifle, and walked down into the canyon. The descent took minutes that felt like hours. Her shoulder bled through her uniform, but she didn't stop. When she reached him, he was propped against a boulder, coughing, eyes glassy but aware. He looked up at her, smiling faintly. "You still don't miss." Her breath caught. "You shouldn't have made me prove it." He laughed weakly, blood staining his teeth. "You once said distance is mercy. You lied." She knelt beside him, shaking her head. "No, Adrian, I meant it. Distance keeps you from seeing what you've done." He looked at her, eyes softening, the arrogance gone, replaced by something achingly human. "I just wanted to matter," he whispered, "to be what you were." She swallowed hard. "You were supposed to be better than me." He blinked slowly, his breath weakening. "Then forgive me." Her hand trembled as she reached for his. "Always." His fingers tightened once, then fell still. The valley was silent again. Only the wind moved, carrying dust, ash, and unspoken prayers. Elena sat beside his body for a long time, staring at the horizon. Steele arrived nearly an hour later, his boots crunching softly on stone. He stopped a few feet away. "Is it done?" She nodded once. "He's gone." He looked at her shoulder, at the blood. "You're hit." "Just a graze." "You need medical." She shook her head. "Not yet." He crouched beside her, eyes flicking to the young man lying still in the dirt. "He was one of yours." "Yes." Steele sighed. "You couldn't have known what he'd become." "I should have," she whispered. "He learned everything from me, even how to aim at a ghost." They buried Adrian Vega at the base of the ridge. No ceremony, no flag. Just stones stacked neatly, the way soldiers mark their fallen when there's no one left to claim them. Elena carved something into the top stone, not his name, not his rank. Just 3 words, "Forgive the teacher." As she packed her rifle, Steele watched her quietly. "You did what you had to do." She didn't look at him. That's what everyone says before they can't sleep. He sighed, standing. "You stopped him, Elena. You ended this." She finally looked up, eyes hollow. "I didn't end it, sir. I just passed it on." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She gestured toward the horizon. "Somewhere, someone's going to read about this. Another recruit, another dreamer. And they'll think, if she can shoot that far, maybe I can go further." Her voice broke. "That's how it starts, sir. That's how it never ends." When they flew out the next morning, the dawn was red across the desert. Elena sat by the window, her arm bandaged, her rifle locked away in its case. She could feel the hum of the engines through the floor, steady, indifferent. Steele sat across from her, his expression unreadable. Finally he said, "You've given enough, Sergeant." She looked at him. "Then why do I still feel empty?" He didn't answer. He just looked out the window with her, both staring at a world that didn't care who fired the first shot, only who survived it. When they landed at Incirlik Air Base, reporters waited on the tarmac. News of the ghost sniper had already spread, though no one knew the truth. Steele walked beside her, low voice firm. "Command," writing it as an internal incident. "Classified, your name won't be attached." She nodded. "Good. You don't want credit." She gave a sad smile. "Credit is what made him." She started toward the hangar, the sun rising over her shoulder. Steele called after her. "Rodriguez, where are you going?" She stopped, turned slightly, to find somewhere the wind doesn't talk. Then she disappeared into the morning light. That night, far from base, she sat alone on a hillside overlooking empty desert. The Barrett lay disassembled beside her, silent, heavy, patient. She ran her fingers along the engraved initials, ER. For the first time, she didn't feel pride or guilt, just understanding. Her grandfather's voice came back to her, clear as the day he said it. "The shot's already decided before you pull the trigger." She whispered back, "Then maybe the lesson was never about bullets." The stars above shimmered like distant muzzle flashes, their light taking years to reach her. And she realized maybe that's what all of this had been. The long echo of one moment, stretching across time, finally finding its way home. What happens when the war ends, but doesn't leave you? The morning she landed back on American soil, the sky over Virginia was gray and empty, the kind of sky that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain or stay numb. Elena walked down the ramp in silence, a duffel over her shoulder, her uniform stripped of insignia. No cheering, no reporters this time, just the sound of boots against wet asphalt. Steele was there, waiting by a black sedan. He gave her a small nod. "Welcome home, Sergeant." She stared past him. "Home's a long way off, sir." He didn't argue, he just gestured toward the car. "We've got a debrief with command. They want your statement." She sighed, eyes on the clouds. "Of course they do." The briefing room smelled of coffee and secrets. Two colonels, a civilian from Defense Intelligence, and a PR liaison sat across from her, all in pressed suits and polished expressions. They asked questions in rehearsed tones. Confirm engagement details. Target identity verification. Weapon used. She answered them all flat, precise, stripped of emotion. When it ended, the PR officer leaned forward, his smile too polite to trust. "You understand the sensitivity of this operation," he said. "We're drafting a public statement, something inspirational to honor your service, your sacrifice." Elena tilted her head. "You want to turn it into a story." He smiled wider. "America needs heroes." She almost laughed. "Then make one up." He blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me." Her tone stayed calm, but her eyes burned. Heroes don't bury their mistakes. They don't shoot their own shadows. The colonel beside him cleared his throat. "Sergeant Rodriguez, we're not here to judge your methods. You neutralized a hostile threat." She looked down at her bandaged arm, the faint smell of desert dust still clinging to her jacket. "I neutralized a student," she said softly. "You don't make propaganda out of mercy." The room went silent. Finally Steele stood. "That's enough," he said firmly. "She's done her part." They didn't argue. They didn't need to. They just let her walk out, carrying nothing but the silence she'd earned. Weeks passed. She moved into a small cabin outside Austin. No neighbors, no range, no noise but the wind through the mesquite. Her days became rituals. Coffee before dawn, fixing things that didn't need fixing, watching the world keep spinning. Sometimes she'd hear a car backfire in the distance and flinch, half expecting the report of a rifle. Old habits die harder than old wars. Steele called once every few days, always checking in without saying it out loud. "You sleeping?" "Trying." You thinking about him? Always. He never pushed further. Maybe he didn't know how. Maybe no one did. One night near midnight, she sat on the porch with her Barrett beside her, cleaned, unloaded but not forgotten. The stars overhead were sharp and cold. She whispered to them like old comrades. 3,247 meters, she said softly. That was the number they cared about, but not the distance between me and what it cost. She took a slow breath. People think distance keeps you safe, but it doesn't. It just delays the sound. Her eyes drifted to the rifle. She'd planned to donate it to a museum, the record-breaking weapon, the curator had called it, all pride and ceremony. She said she'd think about it. She'd lied. The rifle wasn't history. It was confession. A month later, a letter arrived from the Department of Defense. Formal, impersonal, but neatly folded, like guilt in uniform. It read, Sergeant Rodriguez, you are invited to attend a closed ceremony at Arlington. A commendation will be presented for your exceptional marksmanship and service to the United States Marine Corps. She stared at the letter for a long time. Then she laughed, quiet, bitter, disbelieving. They wanted closure. She wanted truth. Those two things had never belonged in the same sentence. The ceremony was small but polished, marble steps, brass trim, folded flags. Steele stood beside her in his dress blues, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. A general she didn't know read from a script, words written by someone who'd never held a rifle in the cold. Courage under fire, unwavering precision, exemplary service. Elena's hand stayed at her sides. When they called her name, she stepped forward. A silver plaque engraved with her name was handed to her. Elena Rodriguez, record holder, defender of peace. She stared at it, her reflection fractured in the polished metal. Then she raised her eyes to the crowd of officers and dignitaries. Her voice was calm. Peace doesn't need defenders with rifles, she said. It needs people who know when to put them down. The general blinked, unsure if it was part of her speech. She turned to Steele, handed him the plaque and walked away. No applause followed her. Just silence, the kind that lingers when truth lands heavier than ceremony. Later, Steele found her sitting by the tomb of the unknown soldier, the sound of the honor guard echoing faintly across the marble. You could have played along, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. And lie one last time, no, sir, I'm done shooting blanks. He sighed, sitting beside her. You're going to vanish again, aren't you? Not vanish, she said, just fade out of range. He nodded slowly. And if they call you back? She looked at him, eyes soft but final. Then they'll find my rifle melted down and buried 6 feet deep. I trained enough ghosts, sir. I don't plan to become one. The following morning, she loaded her truck and drove west. No destination, no plan, just the road stretching into nowhere. Somewhere beyond the desert, beyond memory, beyond what war had carved into her. At a rest stop outside New Mexico, she saw a group of young recruits waiting for a bus, laughing, loud, wearing fatigues too new to be real. One of them, a girl barely 20, noticed her. Ma'am, she said nervously, are you Elena Rodriguez? Elena paused. The others turned, eyes lighting with recognition. You're the sniper, one said, the one who made that record shot. Elena smiled softly. I used to be. Is it true? The girl asked eagerly. You hit a target over 3 kilometers away. Elena studied her, the same bright eyes she once had, the same hunger to prove something. She could have told her the numbers, the conditions, the math. Instead, she said quietly, it wasn't the distance that mattered. It was what I missed seeing while I aimed. The girl frowned, confused. But Elena just smiled, gave a small salute and walked away. She didn't owe them the story. She owed them the warning. That evening, she reached the edge of a wide canyon, red rock glowing under a dying sun. She parked, stepped out, and stood at the edge, wind tugging at her hair. From her truck, she lifted the Barrett one last time. Her hands didn't shake. She set it down on the ground, leaned against the rock, and stared at the horizon. The silence felt different now, not hollow but full. Not empty but earned. She opened the rifle's bolt, removed the last round, and held it between her fingers. A single brass casing, gleaming faintly in the sunset. She etched something into its side with her knife, 3 small words, "No more distance." Then she placed it inside the rifle's chamber, sealed it, and walked to the canyon's edge. With a quiet motion, she threw the Barrett into the abyss. It fell silently, swallowed by the desert below. She stayed until night. When the stars came out, she lay back on the cool rock and watched them in stillness. They didn't feel like ghosts anymore. They felt like witnesses. For the first time in years, she wasn't a sniper or a soldier or a record. She was just Elena, a person learning to breathe without the weight of a trigger. Her thoughts drifted to all the names, all the distances, all the shots. None of them mattered now. Only one thing did. Her voice, soft as wind, spoke to the night. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The desert didn't answer. It didn't have to. Because for once, silence wasn't punishment. It was peace.